an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Killing Eve, Season 2, Episode 7, Wide Awake. In this episode, Eve is beginning to realize that something isn't quite right with her in a way that feels much more aware than it had been. Also, Villanelle handles the situation with Niko. Would we call it handling? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much. I'm realizing now as I pull this up, I'm like, you know what? I don't know who scheduled this one. I'm in the middle of my sentence. Let me check. Thank you very much to Tonje for commissioning this episode. Tonje Louise. I hope that I am saying your name right. I am so excited that I got another episode of this show so soon. I didn't realize that I was getting a couple in a row. And this episode is a really, really good one. I am really flipped out, to be honest, that I have one episode left and then season 2 is over. And I'm just going to Google right now because I am assuming that season 3 has been either released or has there is a season 3, so it's not on Hulu. I think that maybe if it's coming out as we speak, it's the kind of thing that you need to have their like live TV subscription, and I don't, so I'll have to find it somewhere if I've been commissioned into season 3. But I have no idea what happens the rest of like, I kind of thought that I knew what direction the show is going in. And in a way, I was right with Eve and Villanelle growing closer in a weird way and working together. But it's not happening in a way that I had foreseen. And Eve's own journey is not something that I could have predicted. So I don't have any sort of idea when I think about what could be in store in season 3, where we're going, because we're still dealing with evil Steve Jobs over here. And it doesn't feel like we only have one episode of further investigation of him. And then we wrap things up with whatever wrapping up looks like, his arrest, his death, what have you. I feel like there's more to this dude than one more episode, but I could be wrong about that. This show has not failed to surprise me on many fronts, and who knows, he might be taken care of within the first 5 minutes of the next episode for all I know. I want to just start from the beginning here, because this opening is really, really, what's the word I want? It is extremely jarring. So we have, guys, the ending of the last episode where I had been worried that Villanelle was going to kill those 2 girls. It didn't even occur to me that she was going to sleep with them. Honestly, I don't know why it didn't. Because I feel like I knew that, Villanelle is bisexual. I'm saying bisexual. Is she gay? Or is she bi? No, she has to be gay because bi because she slept with the cute boy at her original flat. So, sorry, I just had to parse that out for a second because I was like, I feel like I saw her sleep with a guy, and then I was like, that's the one. So yeah, I should have realized, but the way she went about it was so predatory that it felt dangerous. And I mean, it should. Anything that you do that is that intimate with Villanelle is dangerous. But what she was doing, I think, is like laying the groundwork for these girls to feel extremely vulnerable and a little bit indebted in a way to Villanelle, because she turned up and gave them a feeling of a crowd, which, I mean, I guess that makes sense. It was just really, really hilarious to me how the next episode began. She darts down to open a package, and it turns out I had also asked last episode who she was staying with, because I was like, I don't see her being put up at Carolyn's place, but that's apparently where Constantine is. And it looks like she has her own place, which is just as like elegant and expensive, honestly, looking as the place in Paris had been. And she gets a package from Aaron that has the philosophy book in it that he like dropped in her lap, and a little note that just says, "Come have lunch with me." And Eve turns up right after this. And when she tells her, "I have my date with Aaron that you wanted," she doesn't really have the reaction that I think Villanelle wanted her to have. She's just sort of like all business and not taking a moment to sort of be triumphant about this or anything remotely like what Villanelle, I think, was hoping to see. And then we have this moment where Eve is taking her jacket off and she sort of stops midway and sinks onto the bed. And Villanelle asks, "Are you okay?" And Eve says, "I don't know if I'm okay, but I don't want to talk about it." When Villanelle says honesty is the best policy, Eve is interested and stops and is like, "Oh, is it? Okay. Were you being honest in the meeting with what you said about being bored?" And I loved this response. Villanelle says, "I don't know." And Eve is like, what do you mean? You don't know when you're telling the truth or not? And Villanelle says, "Not really." That's fascinating to me. Like, because there has to be a sort of like emotional connection to the truth, a sense of rightness to it that distinguishes it from what's not true. And if you don't have that rightness, if that morality isn't very dark for you, and I say morality because truth, I think people talk about like, there's 3 versions of the truth: his version, her version, and the actual truth. When I say morality, I'm talking about the actual truth. I do think that there is an objective truth in almost everything. And we can sense when we've gotten near it. It's sort of like the experience of being in therapy and your therapist repeating back to you this sort of story that you've told yourself about why things are a certain way or why you are a certain way. And they say, "So this is what you've been saying. Here's what I hear." And they say the thing they've been hearing, and you feel like you've been punched in the stomach. You just know when something is true in this way that is very difficult to describe. And I like the fact that she doesn't know, because this isn't something that anyone else can tell. She has to know whether or not she's bored. I think that we can all say, looking at her from the outside, that it looks like that to us, but she is a consummate actor, and she is the first and last person who can really tell whether or not that's what her experience is. And she's not a person who's particularly introspective. So why would she be sure that is what she is experiencing? Why? She hasn't had to think about it. Who cares? I think is probably like the way she sees it. So Eve asks her, "Do you feel anything?" And she says, I feel things when I'm with you. And Eve starts to get this sort of like touched look on her face. And this girl suddenly comes out of the other room in her amazing snakeskin jacket. And she thanks Villanelle for the sex. And Eve suddenly gets up and puts her jacket on. And I love so much. Villanelle says to her, don't be jealous. You know, I'm not with them when I'm with them. And I love that as she's saying this, another girl walks out. And Eve is like, both times she had been sort of on the edge of really like believing her. And then it's like this totally undermined that moment. But I think like, I know what it looks like to Eve, but it really is still true. I think it's easy for us to see that from the outside. And I wish, I love how much more honest Villanelle is about the nature of her and Eve's relationship. Eve, when questioned directly, will admit that she's like attracted to Villanelle, that this danger and Villanelle's sort of alien, predatory, dangerous aura are a turn on for her. And yet, despite the fact that when pressed, she will admit all of that, she seems unwilling to look at what that really means and admit it, that she has some sort of feelings for Villanelle in a genuine way that are influencing her to a point that is questionable in terms of her own safety, in terms of the, what's the word I want here? The legitimacy, maybe, of the operation? Integrity. That's the word I want. And because she's so unwilling to do that, it's like the whole thing that happened with Niko seemed to sort of come out of nowhere for her. Because as much as it's so clear to everyone else exactly what's happening here, she is so deeply in denial in order to make her marriage work, and I put work in quotes, that she doesn't even let herself see it. And now the fact that Niko has left her, I think, has freed her up in some ways to seeing and admitting what her experience has been recently. Like, there's just a sense to me of her having the shackles taken off. You can't confess yourself in this sort of situation when there is somebody standing next to you who could be horrifically hurt by it. You have to wait for them to leave. And so Niko's leaving is, I think, a good thing. I said that last time, but what winds up happening is so awful. I'll get to it in a second, but I don't really know what influence this will have. We'll see. So Eve tells Villanelle to read the file and bustles on out of there. Villanelle has a bit of an expression on her face of irritation because she keeps wanting Eve to meet her partway. She says things like, don't be jealous. I'm not with them when I'm with them. In this, she's extending a hand, trying to be like, I know how you feel. I'm acknowledging that. And I'm acknowledging that you are important to me. And Eve is refusing to give back any sense that she understands what Villanelle said to her or that it means anything. And I really didn't expect that to get to Villanelle the way that it does. But it does. So then we go to her date with Aaron, and she turns up in this pink wig. And she's seated across from Aaron in a booth in a restaurant that he bought out for the entire evening. And it turns out that he ordered for her already, but he won't be eating. Guys, I could not stop laughing. Those of you who are in the Mighty Network for patrons may have seen already. But I'm sorry, I can't remember. I didn't check to see the name of whoever it was who posted it. But somebody posted a thread that a lady shared on Twitter where she described her experience going to the Bella Italia restaurant in Port Angeles. And she did not realize that it was featured in Twilight. And so didn't understand why there was such a wait list to even get a table. They managed to get lucky. And why people were taking so many photos inside. And the waitress took her order for dinner, but then began to walk away before her husband ordered. And her husband had to like flag her down and be like, wait, no, actually. And the woman says, oh, I'm so sorry. The dates don't usually eat. And I died laughing. Like, the idea to me of sitting with a significant other and eating in front of them while they don't get to eat is just so alien to me. Like, this is, and it's sheerly for role play, you know? Oh my God, no. And just the idea of that, I was like cackling, like, how weird. And then I watched this episode and it's just as weird as I expected. He says, this is the best dish on the menu. It's only available 1 week a year. I won't be having anything. He just wants to watch her eat. And this is sort of a theme that continues to come up. He watches her enjoying things. He watches her experiencing things. And he doesn't want to experience them himself. And I just don't really know what this means. Like, this is a kind of behavior that I haven't really come across before, whether in fiction or in anything that I have read about the behavior of psychopaths or people who are sort of antisocial or whatever. I have never come across this in particular. And I am so curious if any of you have insight on this, if you've read anything about it or if you've seen anything like this. The whole concept of wanting to experience the pleasures of life secondhand through someone else rather than actually doing it yourself. And it's a combo of he's watching her enjoy the thing, but he's also in total control. He tells her what to eat, when to eat. He tells her later on to describe how her jacket feels and to touch her jacket as she does it. The whole, it's like he wants to not experience it personally, but he wants to be in control of her experience as if it were him. And I don't get it. I don't get it. It's fine. Like, if she is somebody who agrees to this, which I should note, we know that she is because she's just curious, right? Like, she certainly, one could argue, she's doing this because she has been sort of conscripted by the detail that Eve is on. Sure, but let's not kid ourselves. Villanelle's going to do what Villanelle's going to do. And whether or not she stays with this particular, like, task force is solely up to her feelings in the moment. The whim that she is currently on is what she's going to do. Now, Eve is here, and that's really why she's here. But I think what keeps her interested in this mission is how strange he is and how much he surprises her in what he wants from her. I think she's genuinely interested in, and not necessarily in a romantic way, but she is said she is always bored. And what better medicine for that than being with someone who constantly challenges your expectations and demands things of you that have never been demanded of you before, when you're used to very much being able to get your own way or do whatever you want. So I'm not saying that I ship them or anything like that, but I am saying I feel like this pairing could work if circumstances were different. And I know that, and when I say could work, I do not mean Villanelle does whatever he says all the time and constantly acquiesces. I mean, she will lash out at him for being an asshole occasionally, and he will like that she does that. After all, what got him interested in her was the fact that she smacked him across the face with a book and left the room. That was the thing that got him going, oh my God, who is this bitch? And I feel, should she pop off occasionally, that will only increase his interest in her. It can't be too frequent, but I will be honest, I kind of want to see what happens when she does that. Does he react violently? Because we know that he is somebody perfectly capable of having people killed. So he has no problem with the idea of murder. However, the idea of killing directly himself is a different thing. And it's something that I would think for him might be the first time he would ever do something like this, because it doesn't seem like he has ever had any relationship of any kind before. And when I say relationship, I'm even including any sort of like sexual contact, which it doesn't seem like he's really had that either. So then that leads me to believe he won't necessarily have had the opportunity to hurt someone personally. Unless there was somebody, you know, that truly flitted in and out of his life overnight. But yeah, I just don't really know if he would choose to discipline her himself, or if he would simply sort of extricate himself from the situation and then leave her fuming for a couple of days before giving her something incredibly lavish, perhaps, to win her back over, because he's clearly somebody who loves to buy things for her. That's what he's like. When they're talking here, this is part of what alerts him to the fact that she is somebody he wants around. So she's eating what he ordered her, and she gets this look on her face, and he says, "Is it good?" And she just nods really slowly and says, "It's amazing." And then we have this, I just love this so much. He asks, "Why did you befriend my sister?" And wants to know if it was to get to him. "I'm very rich. I know what women do for rich men." And she says, "I don't like rich men." And he says, "You like money, though." And she admits this is true. "But you really like it. Why do you like it so much?" And she answers kind of, I think, honestly, "I like buying things. I like owning them. I like having them, looking at them." And he calls her a collector, and she says, "I guess so." And she just says of all kinds of things that make me feel something. And that's when he says, "Come to Rome with me." So I think the idea for him is that she makes him feel something, and he would like to own her. And he only understands owning in that sense of like, I possess you now. You are mine, and I will do with you what I like because I own you. So that is very reflected in the way that he treats her. And he invites her on the spot to come to Rome, and she tells him that she's not sleeping with him. And he says, "Oh, I'm not going to sleep with you. I won't even touch you." But there's like this sort of open-ended like fascination. Another dish gets brought to the table, which, by the way, looks amazing. It's just this pile of pasta with something that looks like a mushroom cream sauce or something over it. Oh my God. And I am fascinated by this, that he would want to have this sort of relationship, but not have any real sexual interest either. And the way that he watches her eating, he's like very into the goofiness of her eating this pasta. I am dying to know what the director like said to him in terms of how to play this scene, because I don't really know what he's thinking or feeling. And I'm so curious. It's like he gets this deep satisfaction out of watching her enjoy a thing. But I can't imagine him ever having enjoyed this thing. And why wouldn't he do it with her? I guess this is sort of like a vulnerability thing. It reminds me of like, because he's basically, this dude is what Christian Grey would actually be like were Christian Grey a real person. You know, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, 50 Shades of Grey is about a rich, allegedly dominant male and his fetishes and like his interest in dominating women and engaging in BDSM. But the thing is that Christian Grey is a terrible example of that kind of lifestyle, because he is super abusive, does not care about consent, and he is not a balanced person and needs therapy, and should be working through that as he continues to do whatever he wants to in the bedroom with a fully consenting partner. This dude is more like how Christian Grey would actually be, where he has this weird distance from people and is like interested in introducing Anastasia to all of these experiences that she's never had before in what feels like an almost paternal manner that is, because I think of that sense of ownership, it's like he feels responsible for the pleasure she experiences in that moment, which maybe is kind of like a sexual gratification in a way. When you are pleasing someone and you are doing it, you are purely responsible for whatever it is that they are feeling. That is part of the joy of having sex with someone. So if he feels like he is purely responsible for whatever it is that she's feeling, maybe that's like fulfilling that sort of need for him in a way. But so when I was saying like, this reminds me of something else, what I was going to say was, in BDSM, it is frequently a theme that the dominant is going to be dressed and the submissive is going to be fully naked or mostly naked. And that is part of the power dynamic, is the dominant being clothed and therefore seeming sort of in control and insulated, whereas the other is incredibly vulnerable and exposed and has no control. And that's sort of the feel of what's happening here with him not eating and simply watching her eat. Like eating without the person across from you also eating is actually a very vulnerable act. I can see it being seen that way, actually. It's goofy, and it can feel like maybe you're gross or just look weird right now while the other person is simply staring. And sex can be that way. You have to let yourself be awkward and occasionally ugly, you know? And I don't know. I am so fascinated by this like attitude that he has, and I just want to understand it more. And I've never come across it. So it's totally fascinating me. So I forgot to mention that, she calls, or no, she doesn't call. It's Eve calling Villanelle a bunch of times, wanting to know what is going on, where Villanelle is, how it went, making sure you're okay. So when Villanelle comes back from her date, there are 9 missed calls and 3 voicemails. And this is super gratifying to her because she wanted something sitting across from Eve on that bed. She wanted a response that Eve refused to give her because she was mad about those women, and she got up and left, and Villanelle was irritated. But then Villanelle comes back to all of these voicemails and gets exactly what she was looking for, which is Eve caring, wanting to talk to her, reaching out to her, making it clear that she cares. And I really love the scene where Villanelle listens to all of the messages because it's such a funny teenage girl scene, you know? It's like watching a girl getting a text from her crush in high school. And it's just kind of nice to see Villanelle happy in like a real way, because there has been very little of this sense of her feeling reinforced by Eve's behavior in a minute, you know? It's, I don't know. I like to watch her be happy for a minute, and it's just really, really cute. So we have Carolyn and Eve meeting for coffee, and Constantine is also there and tells them that Villanelle is excited. And Carolyn asks her about razzing her up. She says, what's her state of mind? Have you been razzing her up, Eve? I'm counting on you to keep her calm. This is your operation and your responsibility. She just has to sit still, be quiet, get the buyer's names on tape. We need to know not just what he's selling, but who he's selling to. And Constantine, understandably, says, Villanelle, sit still. And Eve says she will, but she needs to think that she's in charge. Constantine doesn't say anything to that. He takes a sip of his coffee, and I couldn't read his expression. I wonder if he doesn't see what Eve means, though. I was tempted to think that he's just sort of laughing up his sleeve, but I think really when she says that, he's kind of like, oh, yeah, I guess that could work. And she asks if there will be a team. Constantine says he can come. And Eve says, I can do it. But it's clear she really wants somebody else. Carolyn says to take Hugo. And she's like, well, you sacked Kenny. And what is the other girl's name? I just saw it. Catherine is too pregnant to fly, I think she says. Is her name Catherine? Jess is too pregnant to fly. I don't know why I can't remember her name. He's very upset, and I have to live with him. So Eve says, fine, I'll take Hugo, which really goes somewhere. I didn't expect it to be how it was. I'm going to talk about that. I find that very funny. So we go then to the scene with Niko. And what's this girl's name again? We'll see in a moment. I'm sure somebody will say it. Oh, it's like Gabby or something starts with a G. Gemma, I think. And they're in his storage unit because apparently he's moving out of the house, but doesn't have anywhere to actually put everything yet. So he is keeping everything, in this like third party area until he finds somewhere. And Gemma is looking around and calls him a hoarder. And he tells her, you don't need to help with this. She says, I like helping you. And they're having this sort of general conversation about his stuff. And she says that you can keep it at my place while you find somewhere. And he says, you've done enough. And she says, I could always do more. And then Villanelle says, ugh, get a room. Guys, when I tell you that I almost hit the ceiling, I swear to God, because I was already really surprised to be seeing a scene with Niko after what had happened. I kind of had put the seal on his involvement in the story with him leaving. I didn't think that there was going to be much happening after that. So when these two appear, I thought it was odd, but my next thought should have been, well, they wouldn't get a scene on their own now, would there? And who's prone to popping up where they don't want to be? And I didn't put that question to myself. So when Villanelle turns up, all of a sudden, everything went left. And I was just like, oh no, because she could be here just to mock him. She's done that before. But she had been there to mock him and give him information he didn't already have to motivate him to leave Eve. So there was something very particular that she wanted from that encounter. And now that he's left, I couldn't think, what would she want from him now? What could she get out of this guy at this point? And it's just an awful scene because the tension here is so great. Gemma vaguely recognizes Villanelle, and I forgot that Villanelle had been at that teacher's gathering and in disguise and talked to her. And Villanelle says, I see you got what you wanted. The sexy maths teacher. And the moment of realization where Gemma realizes that this woman that she's speaking with is not only the person whom she confessed having feelings for Niko to, but is also not speaking in the same accent or behaving in at all the same way. It's obvious that some shit is happening she doesn't understand. And this is kind of like, I feel terrible for what winds up happening to Gemma, because as much as I don't particularly like the woman, and it's not really any fault of hers, all I have seen of her is her fawning all over Niko, which I'm not really ever going to be able to respect a woman who just falls all over herself like this regarding a dude. But I don't have any reason to hate her either, as much as I feel like I maybe am supposed to because of her getting in between Eve and Niko. Eve was doing a fine job of fucking up her relationship without Gemma getting involved. Like, Gemma was the lever that really pushed everything out a little sooner, but that shit was happening already. So I don't even blame Gemma for that so much. And I'm not even that mad at Niko for going for it with Gemma, even if he isn't like that into her, because it's hard when you need an escape hatch and you see one so perfectly set up to not take it. So all that to say, I don't hate Gemma, but I do. So I feel bad about what winds up happening to her, but I do have to be a little bit amused at the fact that she is such a sweet sort of, like, at least in her behavior, person. And this is the second time in like a week that she has come across a woman who has been extremely threatening to her. Villanelle basically does to her what I think Eve would low-key have liked to do were she in a different situation. So she approaches and gets really up close in his face and pulls out a knife. Tells him, after our little encounter, it seems like you and Eve had a good time. You should always close your curtains. You never know what kind of pervert could be outside. And he asks what she wants, and she gets right up to his face and says, I want a recipe for your shepherd's pie. And he's telling her all the ingredients, and I love how she's just like, yeah. But then when he says Worcestershire sauce, although he calls it Worcester sauce, which honestly makes a lot more sense to me. When he says that, Villanelle gets this look on her face like, aha, yes, that's what I tasted. Like, there's a real sense of victory and triumph that she was like, I knew it wasn't that simple. That's what it is. So she says, that wasn't so hard, was it? And he says, are you going to leave us alone now? And she says, of course not. Why don't you sit down? And backs them both up onto the couch. And later on, she asks, do you love her? And she's pointing to Gemma when she says it. And he says no. And Gemma looks a little bit crestfallen, and Villanelle says it's better to know now. I have to say, if he said he did, I wouldn't buy that at all. It's interesting that it doesn't seem to occur to him to lie here. He seems totally cowed into speaking the truth, regardless of, what she's going to think about it. And I don't know. It's just like, I wouldn't expect him to love her. And if she said that she loved him, I couldn't take that seriously either. Like, people who say that they love someone that they do not know, it doesn't wash with me. So her asking him, to me, it was way too soon for that question to have any sort of meaningful answer. When he says no, I'm like, of course he doesn't. He's been living with her, kind of, for like 2 weeks now. I feel like it's been. There's no way. But I guess people will say they love someone pretty fucking quickly. So what do I know? So then she asks, do you love Eve? And he gets this look on his face. And she had been sort of smiling when she asked the question. But when she sees how drawn he gets, her face sort of falls. And she asks again. And he says, yes. And she looks very displeased. She says, are you sure? I think she just wanted him out of the way. If he didn't love Eve anymore, he was no sort of competition or anything to worry about. But if he's still out there loving her and fighting for her, perhaps, and this girl who is in his life doesn't mean anything to him, I guess that's seen as a threat. That said, she doesn't kill him. And the reason she gives for that is Eve would never forgive her if she hurt him. It's interesting to me how teary-eyed she gets when he says that. She says, I was so close to letting the two of you go. You should have chose Gemma. And he says, don't hurt her. This has nothing to do with her. And she says, but Eve would never forgive me if I hurt you, Niko. Would she? And that's the end of that scene until we get to the very end of the episode, where he wakes up on the ground. It's a terrible moment, guys, because honestly, he's laying there so still. I thought at first that he was dead. And I was like, well, she just said she wasn't going to hurt you because of, like, so what the fuck? But then he finally stirs and he sits up and he, like, backs away. He's got, like, a black eye. And he backs away into the wall and we see Gemma's body, and she has been suffocated with a plastic bag with a fragile packing tape wrapped around her neck. And I am guessing here that what she has done is set Niko up for this murder. I'm assuming. Now, I may be completely off base here. She may have just killed this woman in order to maybe attempt to completely sever things between him and Eve. I'm not really sure what her motivation was here. Was she trying to do a thing that would make Eve happy? Like, because does she think this is what Eve would want? And for the record, I'm not entirely sure she would be wrong. Or, like, I don't really know what her objective was here. If she's framing him for a murder, I don't really see that working, because I feel like that would be something that if, Carolyn is as high up as she is, she would ensure that Niko wasn't held responsible for it, because they'd have to know who actually did this. I am super curious what the fuck Eve does when she finds out about this. Like, that's the next episode is the finale of season 2. And for the record, guys, season 2, episode 7 is the last commissioned episode. So unless somebody has commissioned another one recently, this is the last one that I have on my schedule. And I need y'all to get me into season 3 here, guys. I'm going to die. I am already booked into October. I can't wait that long. You guys got to help me. That is going to kill me. Oh my God. I just my heart stopped when I saw that. So we go from there to there's a moment between Carolyn and Eve where they're speaking privately. And Carolyn, I'm going to go to that moment here. She asks Eve, well, actually, Eve is leaving. I forgot about this because I thought that the scene between her and Carolyn, when she's asking, are you doing anything weird, attention seeking or heightened response to things? Before that happens, she's leaving the meeting that she had at Carolyn's house, and Kenny stops her and says, hey, you forgot your charger. And she's like, oh, that's not mine. And he says, the operation in Rome, don't go. She says, what? He says, get out of it. In my operation. And Carolyn interrupts, asking if he wants creamy or smooth peanut butter, with an attitude that, to me, indicates she knows perfectly well what the fuck he was about to do. And I really want to know, because by the end of this episode, we're still in Rome, what's going on with his operation that he is so concerned about. I don't know. I'm really it seems obvious that Carolyn is not exactly on Eve's side. She is on the side of getting this shit done. But I am dying to know what that means and why he's worried about Eve. So we go to Villanelle packing, and we see all of the various weapons that she's got mixed in with things. So there's a jar of what looks like it should be powder, but there is a razor wire rolled up inside. There is a pack of birth control pills, and he pulls that out, and there's on the Saturday, which you can see, it's got a very thin silver line around the outside of the pill. He has that, I think, is supposed to be the hearing piece that she wears, and I can't get over how tiny that thing is. I know that we already saw one before that she swallowed, but I feel like I didn't really have a good point of reference. And seeing that it's as small as a birth control pill is bonkers. And I'm sure that's actually a real thing that's out there in the world, but I can't wrap my head around that. He tells her that the safe word is gentleman, which she isn't particularly impressed by. And he tells her essentially, first of all, he says, are you planning something? And she gets this very guilty expression. He says, if something happens, you and Eve are on your own. And he says that in a way that I believe is meant to be seen as a threat. But I think he underestimates just exactly how much that's exactly what she wants. So let me go to Eve sitting outside of what turns out to be a counseling session. And this dude comes and sits down next to her. And he gives her this real flirty vibe, eye contact. And he is pretty attractive. He's got an energy. And as it turns out, that energy is serial killer. He gets escorted away by a man in scrubs, and as he does, this dude, who I do not remember his name, says to Eve, he killed 3 women, and she says he could kill the shit out of me, and then sort of realizes that maybe that wasn't the correct thing to say and seems a little bit embarrassed. So she gets brought in to have an evaluation, I guess. I guess not. Because he says, Carolyn didn't say you were coming, and she says she doesn't know. I missed that last time. And she says, is there anything that I need to know? Basically, she says, we're saying this in confidence, right? We're putting our asset undercover with somebody who is extremely irritating and also a psychopath into a high stress environment. Is there anything I should know that can diffuse the situation if it gets out of hand? And he's like, let's be real here. If it gets out of hand, it will. And she's a psychopath who murders people. She can take care of herself. And Eve says, no, she can't. And he gets very interested in that. And he says, when people come to see me wanting to talk about someone else, they almost always want to talk about themselves. So, and she says, I'm here for work. And he says, of course, however, how much of the day do you spend thinking about her? And she admits most of it. This begins a sequence in this episode and of this show that is one of the most restrained and yet so powerful moments. Sandra Oh in this is just the feeling of barely constrained combination of terror and fury and excitement. You can feel it almost pulsing out of her as he asks her these questions. He says, you two in a relationship? Define relationship. Are you having sex? No. How are things at home? My husband left me. And she says this with an expression that indicates to me she hadn't been sure if she would tell him that. Like, seems to be a split second she decided to tell the truth because she seems to feel it matters here. But I think she surprised herself a little with that. And then he says, are you behaving differently, doing things you normally wouldn't? She says, yes. And do you feel unsafe? And she says, yeah. And as she says that, you can see tears in her eyes. And he says, how else do you feel right now? And she says, this is the title, I feel wide awake. And you can see when she says that, it is not what he expected to hear. And he seems a little bit concerned by that. He swallows and he says, I recommended that you be taken off this operation. I said you were too involved and too compromised, but my recommendation was ignored. I am telling you for your own safety. And she, again, with tears in her eyes, looks up and she says, thank you. I'll bear that in mind. And she just get up and books it out of there. I don't know how much that is the thing that sort of broke through. But I feel based on how things go later this episode, it's the closest she's come to really saying out loud the truth of how she's been feeling. And it had an effect. So then we see the conflicting, sort of, they're just contrasting really, moments of her and Hugo checking into their shitty little hotel versus Villanelle checking into hers, and how disparate these experiences are. One of them is a palace in which she is greeted with no need to check in. Their bags are swept away. Everything is done. And she is a celebrity here. Meanwhile, the two of them are struggling to drag their shit up the stairs, yada, yada, yada. She goes into her insane room. It's the kind of room that I'm just like, I wouldn't even want to stay here. It's too much. I couldn't sleep. These statues hanging around just staring at me? No, thank you. But all of her bags are missing and all of her stuff is gone, including that secret little earpiece. And instead, there are racks and racks and racks of beautiful clothing, lingerie, everything is her size as well, which he somehow figured out and custom made. And you can see as she's going through it all, the expression on her face, because she didn't expect anything like this. And this is exactly her goddamn jam. I mean, how can she, we've seen how she lives, and this is very, very in the vein. I love when she pulls out this beautiful, like, silvery gray negligee with black lace on it. And she says, where are my clothes? My things are in it. You have everything you need here. My contraceptive pill, you won't be needing that while you're here. Which honestly is super, super fucked up, because you get really messed up if you don't have your pill. If you have to take a monthly pill, like, you guys do not want to see me if I wind up not getting my prescription in time. Ooh, it's not pretty. So this behavior that, like, oh, well, you won't be fucking, so you don't need it. That's not how that works. And only a fucking dude would say that. And I say a dude would say that even though it's a woman saying this to her, because it's obviously his voice speaking through this lady. So then we have him watching her, looking at the clothes and sniffing them and holding them. And he's watching through this camera set up in her room where he's keeping a total eye on her from multiple angles. And I think she's aware he's watching her. She probably knows, but she's enjoying that. Meanwhile, Eve is realizing that she's not getting a read on that little earpiece, and so she goes to deliver her a replacement one. I kind of thought he might catch them, but he doesn't. And I'm about to run out of time. I can't believe how little I've gotten into this episode, but I talked about a lot of this in broad strokes. But she gives her the earpiece. And then later on, when she goes back to her room, she makes a big show of eating this, like, roll in order to distract from the fact that she was doing something small and fiddly out of sight of the camera. And I like that she has this roll that she can make it all seem like it makes sense. I hope. And later on, when she is in her room by herself, there's an amazing scene where she walks in. He doesn't like the belt she's wearing. He makes her take it off. Then when she sits with her arm up, he says, "You look like a painting. Stay that way until I get back." Exactly like that. And as he walks away, he says to her, "Very good." And she gets what looks like a flicker of a smile on her face to me. I think she just finds this very interesting. And when she goes to bed, she begins to talk to Eve about, basically, you need to learn to let yourself go. I can show you how. And Eve is listening through the earpiece while Hugo has gone to bed. And Villanelle is doing these sexy exhales, these sighs, this sort of tone to her voice. This is a sex line operator voice. And it clearly gets Eve going. So she goes over to Hugo and climbs on top of him, which he is very welcoming of, but definitely didn't expect. And in the morning, he has this sort of like attitude of, "Hey, what's up, sweetheart?" And she is obviously not interested, which he doesn't seem to understand initially what the fuck her problem is. He's really mystified. She tells him to just get coffee. Let's get things going for the day. We have a lot of work to do. And he sees her take out the earpiece, and you can see all of a sudden it all makes sense to him. He is disgusted. And honestly, there's a big part of me that found this really amusing, even though it's gross on Eve's part. You get the sense that Hugo's the dude that tends to use women. And I think him getting used might be good for him, if you know what I mean. There's just this vibe that he has of being just such a shit. And I don't mind seeing him sort of cut down to size a little bit. Although cut down to size, he would look more like a 10-year-old because he's really barely at like 15 for me. He just looks way too young. It's really creepy. But yeah, he leaves, and as he leaves, he says, "Oh, and thanks for the threesome." And she doesn't even deny it. She doesn't say anything to him. She just looks a little bit like irritated that he knows or called her out at all or whatever. But that's about the most of it. And meanwhile, Villanelle is smiling to herself because I think that she knows something happened. I think she knows that she had some kind of effect. I don't know. I think that she just enjoys playing this little game. And lastly, before I wrap up, I wanted to leave it until last because it felt like one of the least important things. But if I had time, I wanted to mention it. There's the meeting with this Russian dude who wants to buy this weapon. And he asks Aaron how they know it's worth the price. And Aaron reels off everything that has been going on in this man's life. The fact that he's having an affair with a man, that his wife is at home, that the boyfriend is going to be starting to blackmail him sometime soon based on the theme of his text messages, where he, had dinner, what he looked up online, everything about this man's life. He just knows and says it all in this stream. And Villanelle is sitting there watching this, sort of gaping in this way that is like, it's really amazing to watch her be so entertained by somebody else, because that is just not how she tends to work. She's the one who makes her own entertainment. And this is part of why I think maybe this could work, this whole little mission. This guy is just fascinating her in a way. And I'm fascinated too. I just don't get him. I don't know. He makes her spit out chocolate later because he doesn't like orange chocolate. He thinks it's disgusting. Yeah, man. So anyway, that is the episode. There's only one left. Please, if anybody out there hasn't commissioned an episode yet, but they've been enjoying the coverage, please consider booking the next one. unspoiledpodcast.com/shop, and you can click on classic TV episode. And yeah, thank you again to Tonje for commissioning this one. I was so excited to cover it. And I will be seeing you all again on the 11th. Oh, wait, no, this is the 11th. Something got messed up. Well, I'll see you all again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.